returning faces and some new faces back there. So for the last few episodes of our series, we've invited local and national politicians to talk about what's going on at the city, state, and national level. And I thought it would be nice to bring in people who did not have the restrictions and biases to talk about what's going on. So I invited two of my favorite reporters. We have Jeff Colton, who is the City Hall Bureau Chief for City and State, and we have Katie Honan with the city, previously the Wall Street Journal. And we're going to talk a bit about what's going on in the city and then turn to a Q&A towards the end, as we generally do. So to set the stage a bit, we have a majority freshman class city council. We have a very new mayor, and we have a governor who's in her first elected term. So we don't have a lot of the institutional knowledge that we would usually have in city and state government. It's a lot of turnover, a lot of tension. So first, I want to talk a bit about the upcoming budget, because that's the most contentious issue on everybody's minds. So right now, we've got Mayor Adams with one perspective, we've got the council with another perspective, and a lot of these negotiations are bleeding into public. So first, Mr. Campaign Confidential, I would like you to tell us what's going on there, and I want Katie to chip in.
Yeah, absolutely. So the city budget is due July 1st. That's the beginning of the fiscal year, and the budget cycle is always ongoing, always ongoing. The main fight this year, to put it very simply, is that Eric Adams says that we need to cut some of the budget, we need to be fiscally responsible, and the city council is saying you're being way too conservative. There are billions of dollars to play with. We need to keep on spending. We shouldn't be cutting every single agency's budget by a little bit. We should be allocating that money and continuing to fund the services and everything at the same level. The two wild cards in the budget this year are the funds for the asylum seekers. So there's like approximately 40,000 folks from Venezuela and other parts of South America and Central America that have come to New York City in the past year, and many of them have no ties, no home, and so they're currently just being cared for by the city. And that's a huge cost. I mean, the mayor has said it's $4 billion. He's probably overestimating, but he says it's $4 billion over 2 years, $4.2 billion. And then the other wild card in the budget is, what's the other wild card in the budget?
Police spending, I think, and I mean, a lot of the cuts to cultural institutions, primarily the libraries, the Department of Education's budget, which was an issue last year. Even after the council agreed on the budget, they do this very ceremonial handshake, hug, everyone's cheering. The council members, which speaks to some of their freshmen, a lot of them had never been there before, they said, oh wait, the budget we approved actually cut a lot of the DOE's budget and we didn't realize. So now we want to take it back. And the mayor, and to be fair, he had a point. He said, this is the budget you all voted on. We've negotiated it for months. You agreed to it. You can't, and if you didn't check it before, I guess it speaks to maybe there was some turnover in the budget in the council finance division and also with the members of the council. So I think those are probably, if you can go back to 2020, how contentious the budget was over the NYPD's budget. Those are sort of always the most contentious things. But I know the culturals this year are pretty big as well.
And I remember the other wild card that I was thinking of, city employees and the unions. Everybody's getting huge rates this year. DC 37, the main municipal employees union, I don't know if any of you have ever worked for the city or the state, but the main union is getting, I think, a 3% raise this upcoming year, a 3% retroactive, 3.25% or something every year beyond this. And that's more than the city budgeted for. The city, at least, whatever, they say they budgeted for less. So that's, city employee salaries are a massive percentage of the budget. There's about 300,000 employees. During de Blasio's time, it was 320,000. We're really losing employees every day. The city headcount is way down. But those are just some of the wild cards that are going into the budget, is that DC 37, all the city employees are getting a big raise. That needs to be paid for. The asylum seekers. And then, everything that we're fighting over is like the libraries, the parks, the police budget. There's just a lot going on right now. And like I said, it's due July 1st, so we've got about 3 months or so for this all to be debated and worked out.
And you pointed out the perspective of the council versus the perspective of the mayor on the economics of it. But the problem is that there's a factual issue at play here. They cannot both be right. So without putting you on the spot too much, as you're journalists, I know you're not biased, but somebody is either wrong or not telling the truth. So what are the facts of the matter?
I think the council, their own financial analysts have pointed to, and I forget the exact amount of money, but there are discrepancies. And the way that you look at the budget, it's kind of always this moving thing. So a lot of it is the actual budget, the projected budget, things could change. You have the capital budget, you have, so what the council has said is there's actually more money in the budget that the mayor's side is letting on. So I think that goes into play. I mean, I also think there is some truth to what the mayor is saying. There needs to be some austerity to certain agencies in finding cuts. He's put in these things called PEGs, programs to eliminate the gap, which under de Blasio, I think he did it once, but it's just a across the board belt tightening, usually from the form of vacancy reduction, or if someone leaves, they won't replace them, that kind of thing. I did also want to bring up one other thing, because you had brought up the union contracts. I don't know if anyone here is like a retired union member. The other things that made me think of is obviously the retiree health care, which is a huge issue. My mom's a retired city teacher, so it was a big issue for her. And the other union contracts, we have UFT, NYPD, or PBA budget. So these are the other kind of financial things looming in the city. And obviously the council doesn't negotiate those budgets, those contracts, but this is something that it's all kind of rolling, if you can imagine this mess rolling downhill to the Adams administration, and these are the financial realities.
And just to add to that, the financial realities, the rule of thumb is that the mayor, whether it's de Blasio, Bloomberg, Giuliani, they always underestimate how much money the city has, because they do not want to be caught with not having enough money. So right now the mayor says that the city is going to have $103 billion. They're like pretty sure it's going to end up being like $104 or $105 billion, but they don't want to say that, and they're kind of like secretly hiding away that money until it's necessary. But like, that's just, it's a weird game where the city council knows that, everybody knows that, but they don't want to publicly acknowledge that in case the economy turns down and that money does disappear. So there's always some conservative budgeting, which honestly is probably better for us as city residents than being too optimistic about the budget and running out of money.
How much of what's going on is a trust issue between the council and the mayor? Because as an outside observer, I've watched the mayor make contradictory statements. I've watched him make statements that are demonstrably untrue and then double down on those statements. So I imagine that's creating an issue, because if you're in the middle of a negotiation that's that important and you have an unreliable negotiator, is he more reliable in private with the council, or are we encountering the same inconsistencies and frankly dishonesty?
There was like a week where we knew we had a mayor, Eric Adams, and a speaker, Adrian Adams, where everyone was like, they're gonna get along great, this is gonna be fine. That fell apart so quickly. Like, the mayor jokes, oh, we're Adams and Adams law firm, and like, we get along great. They actually went to the same high school. Was it a year apart, or the same year?
Yeah.
Like, they overlapped. They went to Bayside High School in Queens at the same time. They both graduated sometime around 1978 or so. So it's kind of crazy that the two most powerful people in city government, both named Adams, both went to high school together at the same time. But they don't get along. They really don't.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the council members, especially the much more progressive members, they really are not aligned with Mayor Adams. And before he even took office, and before a lot of these council members even took office in 2021, they were already kind of throwing bows, I guess, for lack of a better term, over his thoughts on solitary confinement, mainly on Rikers Island. So it's sort of even before he was sworn in as mayor, and before a lot of his council members were sworn in, they had already kind of started fighting. But this is where these things play out. A lot of stuff, it comes out in the budget, and we'll see. Right now the council's kind of negotiating things, and then the mayor comes out with his other executive budget, and then they go through more negotiations. So it is a very long process till July 1st.
Talked a bit about Speaker Adams. how strong of a negotiator has she been thus far? And how effective has she been in communicating the council's wishes and succeeding on those promises?
You said at the beginning this is their first year, and last year, last year was their first year, both Adams and Adams, and you could feel it. I feel like both of them were like not totally in the flow of things of how to present what the council wanted and what the mayor wanted and get that negotiation. Like Katie said, there was some like real fight over the education budget in particular. So I think the speaker is I don't know, I guess we haven't seen yet if she's like learned from the mistakes of last year or learned from the issues of last year. One thing is for sure, Adrienne Adams, the speaker, is very careful. Anytime she speaks in public, she's just reading from notes. She's like very deliberate in that. Whereas the mayor is definitely more of a wild card and will sometimes just like say something that he doesn't follow up on, or he's not reading from notes. And so there's a real difference of style there, and I think there's also a real difference of how they like deal with the budget and policy.
And not to make it sound too House of Cards, but of course you have some council members that are aligned personally and professionally with the mayor, and some with the speaker. Who are the mayor's allies at this juncture, and who are the speaker's allies?
That's a kind of a hard question, because I think the mayor had aligned himself with some council members, especially during the speaker's race. And just for a quick prime, we don't elect the speaker, the council members do, but they certainly spend months and months and lots of money too. They use their campaign money to lobby for it. And I always joke that by the end of it, every single council member has thrown their hat in the ring, even if they have next to no shot of winning. And I know he was aligned with Francisco Moya, who's a Queens council member. I believe they're still aligned to some degree, but I don't think there's any council member. I will say, I think a lot of the Republican council members, and there's 6 now, they seem more aligned with Mayor Adams, who of course is a Democrat, but I think that also adds a lot of tension with some of the more left members.
I'd say the local member here, Julie Menon, is probably more of a Mayor Adams aligned member. I don't know if you agree here, but I think she's a little closer to his side, whereas if you go over a few blocks that way, you're in Keith Powers' district, the other half of the Upper East Side. He's part of city council leadership. He's very much aligned with Adrienne Adams. He's the majority leader. He was appointed to that position. But like Katie said, it's not like there's like one team exactly up against the other. Everybody's kind of working their own relationships, working their own districts. But to oversimplify, I'd say Menon is more of an Eric Adams and Powers is more of an Adrienne Adams.
Something I found fascinating to watch is some of the original alignments fell apart within the first few weeks, and as a keen observer of the reporting, I found I was able to identify which members were speaking on background to you all against which other members.
I don't think so. You can't do that. You can't guess.
Oh, you can. And I found it fascinating because sometimes it would be people who the public were perceiving as aligned who were telling on each other to the press, and it was creating this kind of hall of mirrors situation that was making negotiating harder because nobody knew who their allies were. Would you say that this council now is moving a bit more as a unit, or is there still a lot of that lack of trust? We'll start with Katie on that one.
Sometimes the city council members, despite having some of the most powerful jobs in New York City, behave kind of like little kids in terms of ratting each other out. Who's gonna tell the teacher, I've called council members for comment, and they're like, well, I did that, but you know who else did it? And they just completely rat out other people. So, yeah, I think there's still, and the other complicating factor, I think, is they have an election, and there's a primary in June because of the census, so they only have a 2-year term. So I think there's not even that much time for cohesion because they're all fundraising again, campaigning again. I don't think we're gonna see as many candidates as we saw in 2021, but it's soon, this primary. So I think there's that hurts this, I guess, bond forming in the council.
And in the interest of full disclosure, I am a political consultant, so I am involved in every cycle, including this one. But I'd love to hear your perspectives on whether or not there are any members that you think may not be safe And if so, what the factors are at play there? Because off the top of my mind, I can think of maybe 3, but I'd love to hear your perspectives.
The biggest race that everybody's watching is just up here in Harlem. Kristen Richardson Jordan is the local member for the Harlem district. She is a Democratic socialist. She calls herself a black radical, and was elected with like a really impressive campaign, but with like no institutional support. No unions, no interest groups were behind her. She just like did it grassroots. Which means that now everybody's trying to take her out this cycle. There are 2 local assembly members that are running against her, Inez Dickens and Al Taylor. Both of them represent like half the district in the assembly. Now they're trying to come over to the city council and unseat her. And also Yusuf Salam, who was one of the boys then arrested in the Central Park 5 case back in about 1990 or something. Now the exonerated 5, because there was this DNA evidence, they were found to be exonerated and let out of prison. So he's got a great story. Was raised in Harlem, and he's now trying to run for office for the first time in the city council district. So that's just a really interesting story. I'm eager to see if he can like enter the political space, because right now he's kind of been outside it just as like an activist. So that's 3 serious candidates. They're all trying to take down Kristen Richardson Jordan, who, like I said, has some real grassroots support, but very little institutional support. So that's like the most interesting and fun race, and it's happening just really close here, right in the Harlem district. That's one of them I'm watching.
I think right now we have Justin Brandon and Ari Kagan in Brooklyn, but due to redistricting, Ari Kagan became a Republican and is now running against Justin Brandon. So there's that. So, one of them won't be here next year. I also think Marjorie Velasquez she's in the Northwest Bronx, Northeast Bronx, I'm sorry. And she has a lot of challengers, and I think, the things in some districts, not in the case in Harlem, but certainly in the South Brooklyn district that Justin Brandon has, and in Marjorie Velasquez's district, and maybe even in some districts in Eastern Queens, you have a little bit of a shift from a predominantly solid Democratic voters into more Republican voters. We saw that with the gubernatorial race, where Lee Zeldin carried a lot of the city, and when you talk to voters, it's concerns about crime, it's just concerns about what they might think is too far left of a shift for the city, so this is their votes in reaction to that. So I think if you can look at a map and see where Lee Zeldin really, if there's a lot of red on the map, you can almost guarantee that the council member there, if it's, they'll have either a really strong Republican challenger for the general in November, or they'll actually have maybe a more moderate Democrat for the primary.
And there's also going to be 1 new council member guaranteed, because there's an open seat. Every council member currently, all 51 of them across the city, are eligible for re-election because it's a redistricting year. Most of those 51 are going to win re-election easily. It's going to be kind of boring. But there's one brand new open seat in South Brooklyn, the growing South Brooklyn Chinatown, in the area around like Bensonhurst and Sunset Park. New city council district, it's an open seat. There's already like 6 or 7 candidates that have filed. They're all running against each other. So that's going to be interesting. This is the first year. I think there's 6 city council members of Asian descent, which is a huge increase over past years already. And now there's going to be another one, because everybody running in this predominantly Asian district is an Asian candidate. So that's interesting to see, just the demographic shifts of New York. I mean, we all see it where some districts have shifted over time with different ethnic groups moving in and out, and this is a new one. This is a new Chinatown in Brooklyn that is now going to have representation at the city council level.
And you were talking a bit about the shift that we've seen in certain constituencies towards the Republicans because of a perception about the Democratic Party. How are city Democrats dealing with that right now? Do you see them trending rightward? Do you see them doubling down? What are the conversations going on there? And how are they squaring it with public opinion? Because there's some contradiction going on in which you have people expressing occasionally more right-wing views, but also giving executive figures like the mayor very bad marks. So what does that data mean?
I think the way you see it practically is the Progressive Caucus had, 30? How many members were?
it was like 34.
Yeah, so 34 out of the 51 were in this progressive caucus, and then there was all this reporting on, there was the leaders of the progressive caucus wanted all members to just agree to redirect money meant for the police department for other organizations, community organizations. I guess it was reported as a pledge. So you saw a lot of people leave that, was it
15 left, and now
yeah.
there's 19.
So
remaining.
15 left, and most of the people who left, they are representing like Velasquez, Brandon, people who represent districts where they maybe feel a little threatened. I'm not discrediting the fact that they maybe also believe strongly against what they were required to have done to stay in the caucus, but I also think there was some political strategy and I need to get out of this fast. Now the Progressive Caucus says it's sort of the purest Progressive Caucus.
Yeah, I mean, to put it simply, right, it's like, a few years ago, everybody wanted to identify outwardly as a progressive, and now a lot of members are being a little more careful and saying, maybe I don't want to publicly identify as a progressive. Nobody says defund the police anymore. They still might believe in reducing the NYPD budget, but nobody actually says the term defund because that is politically toxic, and you end up losing elections with that wording.
And I think that also Mayor Adams has gone out of his way to frame the narrative in a way that pushes back against what he perceived as the critics that were impediments to his own rise. And I'm curious as to how at this juncture, when we look at his approval ratings, which are, mayors in New York City don't usually have great approval ratings, so you don't read too much into that, but what have his successes been thus far, and what have his biggest liabilities been?
I mean, does the audience have any suggestions? I think the mayor, look, he inherited a lot. We had a city that was coming out of the worst of COVID, and I think he's helped a bit in trying to redirect personnel and police to address larger crime issues. I think even being this ambassador for the city, whether or not you think it's crazy that he's going out to clubs all the time and partying, but I think he's more fun, and I think he came on at a time when, look, January 1st, 2022 is when he takes office, and that was when New York was ready for some kind of jolt. I think that has helped. His improved relationship with Governor Kathy Hochul, which again, that was something that he inherited. It wasn't up to him. That's been helpful for the city overall. And I think it must, probably crime. And, I also think in this, the council plays a role in this. They've been facilitating the, at least planned construction of more affordable housing when we're in an affordable housing crisis. So that's off the top of my head.
Yeah, he just celebrated the passage of a enhanced earned income tax credit. Basically, people at the lower end of the income bracket are going to get more money back in taxes, so he's very happy about that. And then, right, just the business-friendly vibes. These things take a long time for the city to actually realize the increased tax revenue, for example. But in the past year, the mayor has made a really big effort to say New York City is open for business. I welcome big banks. I welcome Fortune 500 companies. I want you to keep investing in here. We're going to work really hard to get people to work back in the offices. That hasn't really worked very well. There's still, most workers, I don't know about most, but there's still a lot of, white-collar workers that are not going to their desks every day, going to offices. But that's one thing that the mayor, too, has prioritized, making a business-friendly city, but then also with the earned income tax credit and working on building affordable housing. I think he got more red light cameras. Is that another thing he talks about?
That might have already been in the works. You never know.
Yeah.
So, you talked a bit about Governor Kathy Hochul and Mayor Adams' relationship to each other. Something that I found fascinating watching is how much they both proactively attempted to demonstrate a completely new dynamic from what we were used to with de Blasio and Cuomo. How much of that is authentic? How well are they working together, and how much of that is a political facade to hopefully present an idea that things are working better?
They love talking about working together. You're right. Like every opportunity, they're like, we're the best of friends. The mayor and the governor are working together like never before, which is it's a low bar because, I mean, de Blasio and Cuomo openly hated each other. And then even before that, the mayor and the governor like never get along. It's just it's just like a natural fighting between two powerful figures, whoever they are at any level. There's stories going back to the 70s and 60s and just all through history. So the fact that Hochul and Adams are not openly fighting is actually notable. But like that's probably where I'd stop it, is like they're not openly fighting. I don't think they're actually like really working together that great or like really that friendly. Because there's still a lot of political disagreements and there's still the usual like debate back and forth about what gets in the budget and what money gets spent on and all that.
What are their largest areas of disagreement?
Money. You know, the mayor was up in Albany yesterday saying we need more money from the state for the migrant crisis. Governor Hochul proposed the city give $500 million to help the MTA's budget. The mayor's like, no way. So those are the issues, I think, and the mayor has been very open, and he speaks about this frequently, that he doesn't believe cities and municipalities should pay the majority of what it costs to take care of the migrants come in. And he thinks there should be more money from the federal government, but he also wants more money from the state. So money. Yeah.
Really?
Is there any way we can forbid this immigrant entry into our country?
I think that, it comes on the federal, right, in terms of any federal regulation and what's border crossing. And I think a lot of them are coming as asylum seekers, so there is that, it's a different kind of, once they can prove asylum, they could, come in, and there is the expectation to care.
Give everybody a brief analysis of what actually happened in the first place, to make sure everyone's up to speed about the busing of migrants here from Republican states, why that's happening, and talk a little about that.
Right, so there was a huge influx, mostly from Venezuela, but also from other countries in Central America, of migrants traveling, largely like walking literally all the way up through Mexico, up to the US-Mexico border, and at the border, making a claim for asylum, saying that I'm from Venezuela, it's a socialist country, and it's violent, and if I go back, I'm gonna get killed. And according to like international law, the United States has to say, okay, like we will welcome you as an asylum seeker, and then we will assess your claim in immigration court, and if we agree that you are valid, then you can stay, and if we think that you're making it up, then we're gonna send you back, or we're gonna deport you. That process, there is a massive backlog in immigration court. So it takes at least 3 years, maybe up to 5, 10, like it's forever. It's just a huge backlog. And so that word has gotten around, and like now there's this understanding that if you are in certain countries in Central and South America, and you want to find a better life in the US, you can do this, and you can claim asylum and live here. Now, obviously, look, these people are struggling. It's not been a great life for many of them. They're living in shelters in New York. It's just like sometimes head-to-toe cots in big empty buildings because the city is absolutely short on housing. So that's one issue. And then broadly, the president has proposed this new rule that would cut down on that. I don't know the exact mechanism, but I believe that rule is being currently discussed. It's going through the rulemaking process, which is the federal government. It takes months and months for any rules to actually be enacted. But the president's in a tough spot because there's a lot of pressure to change this, to slow the amount of migrants coming to the United States from people like Eric Adams, who says, please slow it down. But he's a Democrat. Biden's a Democrat, and the Democratic Party nationally is the pro-immigrant party. And also, there are a lot of jobs in the United States that do need filling, and a lot of people say this is good for the economy. Even some conservative economists are saying, please do not stop immigration. We need more people coming to the US. So it's a very complicated issue politically, financially, and I think we've learned that there's no clear answers.
When you brought up the connection between the Biden administration and Eric Adams, Biden has gone out of his way to present a very close relationship with Eric Adams, which is a little bit surprising because Eric Adams seems to revel in punching at Democrats in a way that's almost confusing, because he seems to sometimes present arguments from the Republican perspective. Why is he choosing that posture? What is the political benefit to him of choosing that posture? Because there's got to be a reason that he's communicating in that way, but it tends to make enemies of people that would otherwise be allies, especially in city government. So what's going on there?
I think, like Jeff had said earlier, I think Mayor Adams sometimes says things and doesn't necessarily think of the larger, broader consequences of politically, and I think he is a little bit of a political anomaly in that he will say, oh, I was a progressive before you all were progressives, even though his positions on paper are not, at least with our current standard of progressive, it's not as progressive as maybe he thinks.
And he
it
was a
is.
registered Republican.
He had been a registered Republican, he's a former police officer, and I think he has a lot of more conservative stances. And I think as for Biden, I mean, Mayor Adams is the mayor of the largest city in the country, and I think he, even if it's pretending, he wants to show some sort of unified force there.
And just broadly, the mayor is a moderate, and if you are going to present yourself publicly as a moderate Democrat, then you need to prove it, and you need to criticize the progressive sometimes, and you need to criticize the conservative sometimes, just to like prove your credentials. And I think some of it is based on that messaging even more so than like the actual content. But there's also some content disagreements as well.
Yeah, well, because he also recently got into a controversy regarding religion, which is that he was, as we're seeing this scope of white Christian nationalism among Republicans across the country and a rise in anti-Semitism, Mayor Adams started making statements drawing or making outright criticisms of the separation of church and state from a Christian perspective. And this, I live in this neighborhood. This is a majority Jewish neighborhood. And in a time of rising anti-Semitism, it's really concerning to a lot of people when you have a mayor who's talking like a Christian nationalist, as you hear from Republicans. So why is he doubling down on that? Where is this coming from? Because it's completely unprompted.
I think it speaks to his base too. I think his strongest base is even voters of all different nationalities and ethnicities who may be more spiritual, maybe they're older, they are tied to a religion. And I think when he shares the message, which is coming from his, he was raised Christian, I don't know what denomination he considers himself now, but I don't think when he says it, I don't believe he thinks he's excluding the other religions. And he has really embraced lots of other religions in terms of programming, in terms of events and stuff, and he had a lot of support from Orthodox and Hasidic Jewish communities, particularly in Brooklyn. So I don't think he believes that this is separate. But I do think, looking at it in a larger perspective, like you said, it can be very disturbing to people, especially when he's talking about school shootings and he's thinking, we just need to bring prayers back in school. Well, there was a school shooting at a Christian school yesterday where there's plenty of prayers. So I don't think the problem is the lack of prayers or spirituality. So again, I think he sometimes says things that then when we report on it, it's, oh, you guys don't listen to the noise. It's like, well, you said it. Like, it's on video.
You gave me the best setup right there, because I was about to ask about his relationship to the press. A lot of people describe Eric Adams' relationship to the press as looking a lot like Donald Trump's relationship to the press, which is enjoying the back and forth with the press, getting attention for that combative nature. But one area that looks different is Donald Trump often invited the press in so he could get those moments. Eric Adams seems to try to reduce, and I might be wrong on this, but it appears he tries to reduce the amount of interactions that he has with the press that are not scripted. As members of the press, what's your experience of the Adams administration versus the de Blasio administration and the level of access that you have?
I'll give the mayor a little bit of credit. I mean, he does take public Q&A from reporters at least once a week, sometimes as many as 2 or 3 times a week. And that's a base level of him trying to get the information out, but also making himself available for other questions about whatever the news of the day is. So like, he's not shutting out the press completely, as like some people like whine that he is. He isn't. But he should do more. He should, one basic thing, there was actually just a column in the Daily News from a fellow reporter, Harry Siegel, who was noting that de Blasio would appear on New York One every single Monday, and the Brian Laird Show on WNYC on the radio every single Friday, take questions from reporters, take questions from the public. You know, people could call in and ask the question to the mayor. Our current mayor never does that. He never takes questions from the public, which would be really interesting. It's always interesting to see how it would be interesting if he did it, to see how he'd handle that. So I'm bothered by that. And then, yes, just generally, the mayor has complained constantly that the press doesn't cover him fairly, that we don't focus enough on the good stuff that he does, and we only focus on the bad stuff. And my basic response is get over it. You know, the press is supposed to hold the mayor accountable. Every mayor thinks that they're being uniquely criticized by the press. It's not true. We're playing our role, he's playing his role. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he's, comparing him to former Mayor de Blasio, he's funnier and more charming with reporters. I don't know, Bill de Blasio could be so stuck up and snooty, and it's okay, I don't know. He was such an NYU Columbia guy, and Eric Adams went to John Jay. I don't know, maybe I just connect personally on a level like that. I think he has had, there's certain publications he doesn't like, and he goes after them. I think there is something to be said about, look, he is their city's second black mayor, and we are a predominantly white press corps, and I do think that there's truth to, I think it's fair for him, whether or not I agree with it completely, I do think it's fair for someone to say, and I think when he's pointed it out, some members of the press are oh, you're calling us racist. I'm no, he's just saying, look, sometimes people of color say, look, this is a predominantly white institution, and I just don't think I'm getting the fairest shake, that's all I'm saying. And I think that's fine for him to say. But yeah, I think, look, it's almost like a challenge for a reporter. If you're not gonna get bogged down every day, and it's true, a lot of these minor controversies, his constant talking about the We Heart NYC logo, the church and state stuff, it can distract you from maybe the larger systemic issues that we should be focusing our energies and reporting on, because you're doing the daily, he said this, he said this, he said this is crazy, when we're not looking at issues within the city agencies and issues that really affect everyday New Yorkers more than what the mayor might have said.
And that's a really good segue, because we're not going to have that problem in this room. We're going to take some questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I'd like to hear your thoughts about how the city's going to handle Rikers Island.
He asked, for those watching on the live stream, how the city is going to handle Rikers Island.
That's a great question, because that is where there is some disagreement between the city council and Mayor Adams. Mayor Adams has said, I don't see why we need to close Rikers, we need to come up with a plan B, or was it plan C, a different plan. The plan right now, because of this council bill, they signed a law, and I forget, it was pre-COVID, but you cannot have any correctional facility on Rikers Island after 2027. That is the law. You would need to completely change it in order to do that. And this mayor has not been as supportive of the borough-based jails, even though they're continuing construction. And also part of the plan under former Mayor de Blasio was to reduce the number of inmates and detainees on Rikers Island, which would then kind of trigger this closure. And the mayor has said, I don't agree with that, people should be put away if they're arrested and that kind of thing. So he has not been as supportive. But I think as it stands out, look, you see the construction in Lower Manhattan, in Queens, in Brooklyn, in the Bronx, although I haven't physically seen the Bronx construction. This is moving forward, these borough-based jails. I will say the mayor is also much more aligned and is closer with the correction commissioner as opposed to Mayor de Blasio. They had a lot more disagreements, but that is another thing that, there would have to be a lot of legal mechanisms for Rikers Island to not close and to not stay, and to remain as a jail facility after 2027, because as it stands now, it can't.
Yeah, one extra big problem too, though, is that the planned new borough-based jails, maximum capacity of 3,300. Right now, there are 6,000 people in New York City jails. So the city needs to basically cut the number of inmates in half by 2027 and keep it there and never go above that if they're gonna stay on this current plan. And I don't know how that's gonna happen. There would need to be a serious change in the entire criminal justice system, based on the judges giving sentences and the amount of people being held in jail. There's some time to figure that out, you know, until 2027. But it's going to take a lot of hard political work and policy changes to limit the population that is in jail and keep it there. And that's
What do you think that will look like? Like, for example, what role will drug reform play in that process? What are the most likely to pass pieces of legislation that we might see to reduce that population, since it has to happen? And I imagine the easiest thing to start with is probably going to wind up being what were previously considered, you know, minor drug offenses.
I mean, that's sort of already happened to some degree, what you will get arrested on, and I think Mayor Adams' approach to criminal justice is much different than it was to Mayor de Blasio's. The crime numbers, you know, if we're looking at pre-COVID to now, there has been fluctuation, but there were points where it did go up a lot. And, you know, I know that with bail reform too, which is a whole other, it's too much of an issue to get in here, but I think there's a misconception that no one's getting detained in jail, which isn't true, and the numbers don't lie about that. But yeah, a lot of things need to happen for that to be triggered for Rikers Island to be closed. But you know, the construction is continuing. These are incredibly expensive construction projects, and they're plowing through. I mean, the one in Lower Manhattan is like all the stores are gone. They're really going all for it.
So what happens if we run out the clock and it has to shut down? Do they just open the doors and everybody goes? What happens?
Yeah, I think maybe there's been discussion of finding other correctional facilities even outside of the city, or figuring out other places for people to go. But yeah, this mayor's approach is much different. And again, he kind of inherited this, and it's an interesting look at. You inherit a major multi-year project that you maybe don't really believe in, and what do you fund and what do you allocate in terms of money, but then also energy and people to actually carry that through.
And what is the mayor's political standing here? Because I mean, he would have to be, you know, reelected before this completes. Is he looking like he's a shoo-in for re-election? Does a Republican have a chance? Is there a chance he faces a serious primary challenger, given it was such a divided field last time? What's his standing like right now? I know it's a little far out.
Yeah, so June 2025 is when he's up for re-election, 2 years out. And I think there will be a serious primary challenge to the mayor because it was such a competitive race last year, and because also generally, like, the sentiment in New York right now is that things are going in the wrong direction. And that is the right recipe for a serious primary challenge. I think at this point, the mayor would win, even no matter who he goes up against. Just because he still has that institutional support. He's going to have as much money as he wants. He's going to have super PACs putting in $1 billion to get him reelected. He'll be fine. But if things get worse in the city, if the crime rate continues to rise or doesn't continue to go down as it is now, that could be an issue. So a lot could change in 2 years, but I do expect another competitive race in 2025.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially with something like, you know, with matching funds, it makes it easier for people to run. So it's an 8-to-1 matching funds program. But I don't know if there were more questions too. And I don't want to take your facilitator job.
No, you're doing great. I like what you said about, you know, people talking about their feeling that things are going the wrong direction. Because something that I find everyone agrees on the right and the left, is that it's going the wrong way. And how do you navigate that when it seems like any choice you make makes the other side unhappy? There's a degree of polarization that just kind of escalates over time. But yes, next question. I didn't turn before I said next question. Don't be shy. Otherwise, I'll return to our friend over here because he had a really good one last time.
I have more questions.
Let's do it.
So let's talk about the basic economics of New York City, which to me is a tremendous decline. Taking all this building rights, what's happening, it's going to lead to huge numbers of foreclosures, huge reductions in taxes.
Do we have an extra microphone, Evan?
Yeah, you
so we can hear our friend, so I don't have to repeat this whole question, because he was asking it very well, and I'm going to. Okay.
I'm gonna sing a song now.
We're delighted to hear it. We'll join in on the melody.
Talking about the serious economic impact in the city. The city's not thriving. You go everywhere, except maybe in Soho, and you see vacancies everywhere. And I know office buildings, from the real estate industry. I see office buildings with huge vacancies. And a lot of the owners are gonna turn back their buildings to the mortgagees. The net result of that is that there will be ultimately significant reductions in tax collections. The city relies heavily on taxes from real estate. So that's one major issue that's happening with the economic climate in New York. Secondly, you have huge changes in population. People are moving away, particularly wealthy people are finding better ways to hide their money. and one of the ways is to move to Florida or elsewhere and still maintain an apartment in New York City. So you've got that. You've got a serious education problem in New York. The education between unions and what's going on in the schools, and the diversity of the schools. I think there's significant problems there. Housing, we talked a little bit about. Housing's a horror for a lot of people. And I don't know how we're gonna get over that. Maybe you have some thoughts about that.
I'm going to quickly summarize because I heard someone say they couldn't hear. He asked a three-part question, and I'm going to try to get this right. First, he talked about the tax revenue that we're going to lose due to vacancies. He talked about the concerns around the possibility of wealth leaving the city as people move their wealth to places like Florida. And he talked about the struggles that we're facing in the education system. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Wonderful.
So I agree completely with the first part, that the changing look of Midtown, of the office buildings emptying out, people not being able to, or the commercial landlords not being able to pay their mortgages, that's going to be a serious issue. The city is worried about that with their finances. The response, one part of the response is to convert some office buildings to residential. They're hoping that, by pouring the money into it, that's going to get the economy going with construction, and then people can move in, and that it will still help the economy in that way. That's one way. I don't know if it's going to make up for the lack of that part of the economy shrinking, but it's something. So there's a hope, but I think that is absolutely a legitimate issue. And then for the millionaires, I do have to note there was a report that yes, millionaires are moving out of the city. Some are. But New York actually gained millionaires because even though many left, other near millionaires made more money, and now they're millionaires. And that's one lucky thing about New York, is that even in the depths of the fiscal crisis and the crime crisis in the 90s, people still want to be here. Millionaires still want to be here. This is a great city. So that is a legitimate issue, the movement of population out, by all means. But for now, crossing my fingers, people are still moving into New York. Both young, ambitious people are moving in, immigrants from all over the world are moving in, and millionaires are becoming millionaires in New York. So totally agree with one of the financial issues. The other one, I'm hoping, is oversold.
And before we move on to education, we need to let Jeff go because he has a 5 o'clock, and it is 5 o'clock.
Thank you
So,
very much.
yes, thank you very much. So
Wonderful.
let's
Thank you so
give
much
Jeff
for
a
having me. I
hand.
really appreciate this.
Bye, Jeff.
Yes. But I'm staying right here, and we're moving on to the
I mean, I'll
education
speak to the
question with Katie.
education issue, and it comes up too, and it again speaks to some of the fighting with the governor, and how long has this been going on? Decades. The charter school versus public school. There was a proposal to increase the charter cap, and then it was immediately sort of criticized by some elected officials. Mayor Adams has not been so strong in terms of being against charter schools as some previous mayor, as de Blasio had been before, but you know, I think the city schools, I just think overall as well, it's a city of 8 million people, so 8.2, the numbers kind of fluctuate depending on what part of the census is believed, but yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the initiatives from Mayor de Blasio, you spoke to diversity, that have been reversed under Mayor Adams. You know, Mayor de Blasio wanted to remove the gifted and talented program. He wanted to, in certain districts in the city, change the gifted and talented program. That stuff has been reversed. Even like the specialized high school process, some of that's actually state controlled in certain schools. Mayor Adams reversed what Mayor de Blasio had done. And I think for a lot of people, especially newer people to the United States, they viewed specialized high schools as their ticket to prosperity for their kids. And I know when Mayor de Blasio introduced this initiative, it was coming from a place of, yeah, it's predominantly white and Asian schools, these schools. Very few Black and Hispanic students were getting in. But I know when he introduced this, he didn't do it with any consultation with the people who would be affected the most by it. So that's where a lot of that criticism came from. But that was reversed under Mayor Adams, and I think we have a new schools chancellor, and I mean, he's a former charter guy, so I think there's a shift in the thinking on that, but I know that's what keeps people here, and that's always a reason. I mean, I grew up in the city, and you always had people who left because they said the schools, so I don't want to be too cynical about New York's prospects, but I guess my whole life I've been told New York is on the decline in some degree, and the rent's so high, so I don't know what the...
I'm learning right now that you grew up here. Where did you grow up in New York?
Oh, I grew up in Rockaway Park, Queens. So I grew up in Queens, and
And so, what's your perspective on the trajectory of education in New York? How is New York doing now compared to when you were growing up? What's improved? What's worse?
Yeah, I think, and I spent a lot of time covering neighborhoods in Queens that I think they need to build new schools. There's some concerns about I covered 2 of the most overcrowded districts in the city, so that was always a concern. I come to this a little biased. My mom and my sister, my mom's retired now, but my sister's a public school teacher. So I get their perspective on things, but it's the largest school district in the country, and I think there are a lot of efforts to make things better as they're going through. I mean, I will say the public school that I went to, I was getting into so much trouble that they had to pull me out and put me into Catholic school, so maybe I'm a reason of, when I was a little punk kid, my mom and dad said, this is not the environment, you need a uniform and structure, and I got it there. But yeah, I don't have my nephew's in public school, and he needs special help, and he's gotten it, so I think, but even that, like everything in New York, to get that was such a struggle and a fight, and that's, I also think, what happens for anybody, and maybe it's, some of your loved ones, your kids who have IEPs or need special help, is there if you go through the incredibly painstaking process of fighting for it, so.
And I want to build a little on the question our friend asked and talk about higher education as well. I know there's concerns about funding for CUNY and SUNY, and it's, that system is recognized as one of the best public college systems, I believe, in the world. I know people in my family have been a part of it. I've worked I work in politics, I've worked with people that have come up through that system. What's being done to address the funding crisis? And are we at risk of losing some of the access that people currently have to CUNY and SUNY through tuition hikes?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I went to the CUNY's journalism school, and my mom and my aunt, I always say if it wasn't for CUNY, at the time for them it was free, they would not have gone to college. So it's what them going to college meant for me, a generation later, is incredibly significant. So I'm a big booster of CUNY and the role it plays, especially in New York City, and for working class New York City, which that's the fear too, that it's sort of disappearing. But yeah, that's always every year with mainly the state budget, because that's what mainly funds CUNY. There's the concern, you have tuition hikes, you have certain colleges. I know years ago Brooklyn College needed major facility upgrades, and those are huge budget concerns. And yeah, I think the mayor, even though he is a CUNY alum, I don't know if he's been as big of a vocal booster of it, especially when it comes to, you could be proud of being a CUNY alum, but if you're not going to do anything to make sure it gets all the money it needs, then what's the point?
Yeah, and it's, I know that that's what I've seen playing out politically, especially this year in the budget negotiation. The biggest pushback against folks who voted for the budget was, why did you vote to cut our kids' schools? How is that playing out right now in this primary cycle? Is it having any impact in that conversation?
I think in some races, I live now in Woodside, Queens, and my council member, Julie Wan, she has, her main opponent right now is a woman named Haley Kim, who was running like really just on, she cut the education budget. She cut arts and music teachers from your school. I don't know if that will stick and if that will translate, but I think it is coming back, mainly for people who are more progressive, like candidates who are more progressive running against incumbents.
Yeah. And we have time for one more question, so make it a really good one. And if nobody raises their hand, I'm going back to my friend right here, because you've got really good questions. Going once, going twice.
Looks like it's back to me.
It's back to you. Let's, Evan, we need your participant. Oh, here we go. One for you.
How's this? Any better?
Yes. Great bass tones.
I'm gonna sing a song again.
Please. You promised us one last time, we didn't get one, so we're still waiting.
Well, you know, I grew up in Brooklyn, born in Brooklyn and grew up in Brooklyn and lived in Manhattan and lived elsewhere in the world. But I see a marked deterioration almost everywhere I go. You go into the streets and you see potholes, not necessarily in the best areas of Manhattan, but almost everywhere else. You can hardly believe how things look. This morning or yesterday, I guess it was, I was pointing out to someone, look at the structural steel here. It hasn't been painted or touched in years. Look at the rust and the deterioration. I'm talking about supporting highways and so on. It just seems to be that there's just nothing happening. No one's really looking and saying, hey, we gotta deal with this stuff because we have a structure that's deteriorating almost everywhere you go. And it's serious, very, very serious. I don't know what can be done about it, particularly because while there may be populations moving in, and there may be some millionaires moving in, those millionaires make sure their tax basis is outside the city of New York. And my own feeling is that unless there's a change in population, we're losing very good people in this city. And I don't see the kind of reporting, if I could talk about reporting, that uncovers the ugliness that's underlies so much of the city today. Why is it no one's talking about the things that really count? Why is it that I don't see a lot of articles about why we don't have more charter schools, even though the unions have fought it, and some mayors have fought it. But the charter schools have produced great results, generally speaking, when you compare it to the public school system. Isn't that true?
Well, I will say, I think charter schools, they can pick who they can pick kids, whereas a lot of other schools can't. And I mean, I think I'll ask you can keep the mic there, when it comes to what are your main publications that you're reading?
Main publications
Yeah.
that I read? Well, I read the Times and the Wall Street Journal every day.
Well, the Wall Street Journal cut their New York section and I got laid off, so they're not writing about New York City. The New York Times doesn't do as much local coverage despite having a very robust metro section. I mean, I think I would encourage you to broaden, I'll promote my own site, thecity.nyc. We're a nonprofit news site. We just launched an investigative unit, so we have investigative reporters. We've covered Brooklyn Democratic Party shadiness. We've gotten people removed from Mayor Adams' administration because they were taking money. You know, I've written about people who were illegally lobbying and taking money from the city. So I think broadening what you read, because unfortunately, I mean, the Wall Street Journal just isn't writing about New York frequently. They
No, but
cut.
The Times is.
Yeah, the Times is, but in terms of looking at what's getting, I would encourage you just reading. Chalkbeat does great education coverage. I think even the Charter School Network had, they've had different education sites. City and State, where Jeff works. Politico does great political reporting. Even local papers within the boroughs do. I don't know, I'm not as familiar with the ones in Manhattan, but I know in Queens we have great weekly papers.
There's also New York Focus.
Yeah, New York Focus, which is
They've
a
been
lot
doing
of
some
investigative
really
stuff.
good on specifically on economics, because that's an area that a lot of papers, like you were just talking about, national papers that used to direct resources to covering New York are just not doing that. So even when you see, like when you talk about the New York Times, even when you see articles coming out about New York, a lot of those articles are more in the realm of aggregation. They don't have the same level of person power behind them, and they're ignoring these stories. So we're seeing newer publications just start to rise up to cover what's being ignored. And of course, yours is one of them. That's why I
I have to
invited
give
you
you more
here.
homework to read more.
What is your,
It's called the City. You can just go to thecity.nyc. It's a very confusing name. I wouldn't have picked it, but that's above my grade.
And you just mentioned one before.
I mentioned New York Focus. Yes. One of their reporters, Sam Mellons, has had a number of exposés that have been giving the Hochul administration a headache, because he's actually been checking the receipts and seeing where the money's going and who's paying who. And people just don't usually see that information, and it's important information to have because it informs how they vote and how they hold their own electeds accountable to their promises.
And can you buy that at the news center?
They're online, yeah.
That's
I think
a really
yeah.
good-
It's online. So,
And that's, I think, the shift too. Print. I saw this gentleman was reading the print New York Times.
I do.
But yeah, and I think that is it's a shift in how people are getting their news. So it gives an opportunity to online only sites because you don't have to pay for the printing, I guess.
And that's also part of the issue is information access, because people used to be able to rely on the news being delivered to them, and now it's really prioritizing digital natives. Like, Gen Z can get 30 information sources like that because of the apps on their phones and so forth. But a lot of people that are used to just getting the newspaper delivered can't rely on that any longer to get the information that they actually need. What can we do to solve that?
That's a too long of a conversation, and I know you're nearing dinner, but
We are.
that is, yeah, I think it's hard, and I think I think a reporter is the second least trusted job in the United States, first is congressperson. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and changes, and I meet people all the time, they get confused over, I had a friend complaining, God, I hate MSNBC, it's all this opinion. I'm like, it's an opinion news site. But he didn't this difference, and it all can look the same, and I think the 24-hour news cycle, you water down, I have friends who work in TV news, they keep adding shows, right, because they're streaming. It's not like they're hiring new people. So everyone's getting spread thinner and thinner, and it's difficult, and I think people don't know what to trust. Getting into AI and how it can play into fake news, and deep fakes can be very scary too. I thought the picture of the Pope wearing a bubble coat was real until I saw it was fake.
I did too.
So that is that, but I think there are bad things about an online forward news sites where anyone can set up a website and make something, but I also think there's room for a lot of positive things where you have less oversight to get like New York Focus is a small newsroom, but they're doing really great investigative work, and that's how our newsroom's set up. Yeah, but you have a question.
what do you think about NPR?
I think it's horrible with the layoffs from NPR, and it's really depressing because that is, I know some people say it's sort of biased or maybe leans left, but I find it's at least, especially for international and national news, when I turn on, I guess here it's 93.9, but they just have a lot of news, and I think it speaks to the shifts in advertising. They had a nonprofit model and they got a lot of grants, and their grants dried out. I mean, maybe it also expanded too much. I get, I hope with my newsroom that we kind of keep it, sometimes when you get too big, that's where the problem is, but it's, but yeah, being a journalist, you get used to the layoffs, and I got laid off twice. It's never, you kind of accept that as part of the job, and you try to prepare for it as best as you can, while making the work the important part of it.
And until we solve this problem, we just bring folks directly here to you so you can ask them yourselves.
Oh yeah, you have a question, sir. Sure.
What is the percentage of this audience that are registered citizens of New York?
What's the percentage of this audience right
Yes.
here
Yeah, this audience.
that are residents of New York?
Yes.
I mean, every person here lives in this building.
Not necessarily.
This is their home.
Yes.
I mean, or New York City, or the New York City born.
Or this is one of their homes, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, I certainly don't have the demographic.
If
That's
you
an
if you
Evan
registered
question.
to vote somewhere else, raise your hand. No. I'm just-
But I just want to say a huge thank you to Katie and Jeff and you for being a wonderful audience. And thank you for the work that you do to make the world a little more transparent. What was that?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. She's
Round of
trying to lead a
applause,
round of
guys.
applause for me.
Round of
What do we?
I love this. I'm
So-
just impressed by the whole room.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
So I look forward to seeing you all next time. I'm not going to announce the program now because that's Evan's to reveal. But
Joe Biden?
Stay tuned, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.